Hi everyone, my name is Bryce. I want to tell you a story about how my sister stole all my boyfriends from me, and after a long time, I decided to get back at her. Why did I wait so long? Because revenge is a dish best served cold. But I guess I went a little overboard. Watch and listen, then I'll wait for your opinions in the comments. What would you have done if you were me? My sister Taylor and I were always different. She was more boisterous, flamboyant, but I preferred books instead of partying. Taylor loved being around people, but for some reason, despite her popularity and outgoing nature, she hardly had any boyfriends. She was 4 years older than me, so she started having relationships before I did. But when I got older, things changed a little. I got prettier and smarter, and Taylor stayed the same. She was sure that beauty alone would be enough to attract guys, but she was wrong. While I was being asked out on dates, she sat and watched enviously as I was going on another walk with my first boyfriend, John. Be careful, guys are so, you know. Well, it depends on what kind of man you want to attract. I need a psychologically healthy one, so I'm looking to see if he's the right one. Who told you that crap? Did you read it in your books? Yeah, kind of. You better believe me, I'm experienced. You're all in theory, and you're young, and I won't ask you for any advice. Thank you, Taylor, but the only thing worse than unsolicited advice is stupid advice. What? Stupid? Who's stupid? Well, look, you'll see that your boyfriend isn't any better and that he's just like all of them. With that, I left. I had a great night out with John. We went for a walk, rode bikes, flew paper airplanes. Man, it was so romantic. But on the way home, Taylor called me and said there was a burst pipe at home and she was scared. John volunteered to help and we drove faster. Turns out the pipes weren't that bad. Good thing my boyfriend had his hands in the right place. He quickly patched everything up before the plumbers even arrived. I decided to give him some tea and left for the kitchen. After about 10 minutes, it was done, and I called for John and Taylor to chat and get to know each other. I called them several times and they finally came over. But John suddenly said he had business and took off without even saying goodbye to me. What's the matter with him? I don't know, he's kind of weird. Oh, tea? Can I have a lemon? I texted him before I went to bed, asking if everything was okay, and John dryly said yes. I wished him good night, and he texted back, "You too." Really weird, I thought, and went to bed. John disappeared for the next 3 days. Taylor noticed my neurosis, but I didn't want to share it with her. I noticed her getting dressed up one evening. Where are you going? On a date? With who? With some guy. One of those same guys? You could say that. Okay, I'm going. While my sister's love life was thriving, mine was fading. John had stopped contacting me. He was dumbly missing, and I decided to go to his house. His mom said, "John went out with his girlfriend." Girlfriend? Yes, do you have a message for him? Do you happen to know where they went? I need to give him something. Last time he forgot something and asked for it back. I think they're in a coffee shop nearby. Oh, I see. Thank you. A coffee shop? Around the corner? Where he took me? What an asshole. I was angry. I went to the cafe to blow him away. I opened the door loudly, and I saw him sitting there cooing with Taylor. And I so wanted to go over and smack them both, but I didn't. I left in silence, and they didn't even notice me. I found another guy running after me and started dating him. Taylor noticed, started asking what was up and so on. I said I was interested in someone else now. My new boyfriend, Ali, was a foreigner, and we got things rolling. Taylor sniffed out who he was, and one day she came to the cafe where he and I were having dinner. She sat down next to me and started chatting. My hints for her to bail, she didn't understand. And 4 days later, I found out that she dumped John and started dating Ali. The second time was an even bigger blow to me, but I decided not to give up. I decided to think through my plans and keep going. Taylor had beaten 3, 4, 5 guys off of me, and I pretended not to notice. And then I realized that it's not that she likes these guys, she's just doing it to piss me off. Apparently, it was just a fun game for her, but not for me. I decided to play hardball and waited it out. Then I stopped all relationships, stopped talking to any guy who was rolling, took a break. So 3 years went by, and I was still without a boyfriend. Even my sister started asking questions eventually. Are you ever going to get married? I don't know, why? Well, you've been single for a long time. Do you even care? I mean, why? You're cute, you're smart, and there's no one stopping you. Because it's all your fault. I wanted to yell, but I held back. I just said, I don't want to yet. Oh, come on, there were a couple of bad romances when you were younger. Now you're smarter, more experienced, and you can build a serious relationship. Yeah, just like you? What? My boyfriend Alan seems nice. He's asking me to marry him. Well, then get married. I guess I'll agree. Our mom wanted us to pick a groom consciously. Too bad she won't be there for my wedding and yours. She's long dead. We have to move on. I think so too, but it's just too bad. She was so scared for you before she died. Kept telling me to look out for you. I think you overdid it. What? It's okay. I'm going out for a walk. I carried my hatred and anger for my sister throughout the years. The dish I made for her was special. 3 months later, she and Alan married. The wedding was beautiful, and I was her maid of honor. She said I was the closest thing she had to anyone, and I didn't understand her logic because actually she hated me. I waited and waited and waited. Taylor got pregnant 6 months later, started swelling and getting morning sickness. That's when it was time. They lived apart, so I invited them over for a couple of days, supposedly to take care of my sister. Taylor was early. Her husband came home from work and I poured him some whiskey and then provoked him. Yes, that was my plan. So ruthless and brutal, just like Taylor. I decided to hit the sickest spot in the most vulnerable place during Taylor's most difficult time. I set it up so that she'd find out, and that's how it happened. Alan apologized, standing there frightened, and I looked at her and smiled silently. Taylor was shaking with anger. She chased her husband away and sat down, crying. Why? For what? You're my sister. For John, and for Ali, and a lot of the other guys you took away from me. For the few years of my loneliness, for the anger, and hatred you instilled in yourself and in this world, Taylor. So you only did this because I stole your boyfriends from you like 100 years ago? You hurt me, and more than once, so I got my revenge. You're an idiot! Don't you get it? I did it because our mother asked me to. What? What do you mean? Mom told me before she died that I should keep an eye on you, so you wouldn't get pregnant at 16 and ruin your life, so you'd have time to grow up a little. And when you turned 18, I stopped watching you, just like Mom asked me to. She cried bitterly, and I stood there in shock. Why didn't you tell me this before? You wouldn't listen to me. I told you, and you said you knew, that I'm too dumb and I pick the wrong guys, and you have them special. God, Taylor! I felt ashamed, bitter, and hurt. I was disgusted to even look at myself, and I didn't know how to beg for her forgiveness. I'm sorry, it's all my fault, I'm sorry. Taylor was silent. She felt sick and nauseous. A week later, she made a decision and filed for divorce. What? Taylor, but it's all my fault. Why are you getting a divorce? There could have been someone else in your place. It was only a matter of time. You're just one of them in his eyes, so maybe it's better that I found out now rather than later. Are you sure about this? What about Alan? On his knees for now, but my decision is final. I don't trust him anymore. Let him get lost. That was her answer. My sister is wiser than I am, as it turns out. From then on, I supported her in every way I could. I got a job and helped her financially. She moved in with a baby, and she lives with me now. And me? I'm not getting married yet. I guess I still need to get my head around it. What do you think?
Hi everyone, my name is Madison. I want to tell you a story from my life. I just had a moment when your fate depends on one decision, so I had to choose, and not in favor of myself, and it became a real test. In short, now you will understand everything, but in the meantime, listen, watch, and you can ask questions under my story. Do not forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and of course, write your opinion. I'll start with the fact that everything in my family was initially difficult. My mother married a man, my father left us a long time ago, and my mother and I lived together for many years. I grew up and adapted to this life. I even thought it would always be like this. Did I ever think that my mother would ever get married again? Of course not. She worked, I went to school, we rented a small apartment, and in general, everything suited me. So one day she came up to me and asked me what would happen if our lives changed. I didn't immediately understand her question because I hadn't thought so globally yet. I replied that I'd be happy if it changed, only if it was a positive change. Well, my mother said, "Daughter, I met a man and we fell in love." Yes, I protested at first. I didn't want to break out of my comfort zone. I behaved like a real egoist, showed my real character, and even left the house that day. The first thing I did was go to my friend, who is very wise, so I often asked her for advice. I wanted her to support me, to reassure me, but all she said was not to be selfish. Your mother is a young woman, and if she met a decent person, then why not build her own life? You happen to be her daughter and you're underage, so whether you want to or not, you're still going to be a part of her life. And why don't you let her be happier? She told me. Then I realized she was right. My mother did not leave my father. He left us, and now she has met a man with whom, perhaps, she will succeed. Why not? I came home in the evening. My mother was sitting at home all tearful. I said I was sorry, and then I said I didn't mind. She was so happy. Anyway, I met her boyfriend a couple of days later. He seemed to me quite decent, and I was not mistaken. He really won my trust, but the most important thing was that my mother was happy with him. 6 months later, he asked us to move in with him and proposed to my mother. My stepfather had a huge house because he lived with his mother. That lady was not very happy with us. She always wanted her only son to find a younger girl in his years than my mother and without a child. My stepfather immediately warned us not to pay attention to the old woman. She was too grumpy. My mother and I were mentally prepared, but still, it turned out that I did not fully realize what was waiting for me in the bad character of my grandmother. Since my stepfather and mother worked, they were not at home all day, and I came home after school and spent the whole day together with my grandmother. She insisted on calling her Mrs. White. She found fault with everything. I wash my hands with the wrong soap, I eat too much bread, I use too much water, I use up electricity, I don't wash the floors properly, I don't dust properly. At first I was silent about it, and then I began to tell my mom and stepfather, and he had a fight with his mom. It was a nightmare. There was a lot of swearing in the house, and I wanted to get out of there more and more, but I saw how my stepfather supported my mother, stood up for her, protected her, and it was nice. But when I began to ignore her attacks, she switched to attacking my mother. The old woman stayed in the toilet or bathroom for hours. She spoilt the food prepared by my mother, and especially threw her colored things into the laundry along with my mother's white shirts. She used to mess up, like accidentally knocking dishes off the table with food in them, and in the middle of the night, often walked around the house, making noise. My mother was patient. She didn't say anything, but I saw everything. Well, one day I came home from school, and I saw that my grandmother was picking through my mother's things. I asked her not to do it, and she kind of exploded. If it wasn't for you, everything would be fine. You're a real burden. Someone else's child will remain a stranger forever. You are someone else's blood, and you will never be my granddaughter, she shouted, and then went to her room. Her words hurt. Over time, I realized that there was no place for me in this house. If I was not there, she would leave my mother alone and let them live in peace. I seriously thought about her words, and one day, I left home for school and did not return. I asked to see my friend again, just for one night. Candy asked me to stay as long as I wanted, but I had plans to go back home to where my mother and I lived. I managed to save some money, sold my phone, so it should have been enough for the first night. Candy's phone didn't stop ringing all night, but I told her not to pick up because I knew it was my mom. I told my friend that I would rather live on the streets than destroy my family. Maybe then my grandmother would calm down and leave my mother alone. We ate dinner and went to bed, glad Candy's parents weren't home. The next morning, I had breakfast, packed some food, and drove to the bus stop. Sitting at the bus stop, I had a sandwich to eat, and then I heard a siren. It was the police. At the sight of them, I ran in the other direction, and of course, they caught up with me in the car. I was taken to the police station, where my mother arrived in 4 minutes. It was probably the first time I'd ever seen her like this. Red, tear-stained eyes, a haggard face. She was shaking all over, and when she saw me, She fell at my feet and began to hug and kiss me. My stepfather also hugged me tightly. He even cried and asked where I was and what I was doing all this time. I told them everything. My mother hugged me again in horror and told my stepfather that they should break up. "I can't risk my daughter's life. I'm sorry," she said. The two of us went to our old apartment. I saw how sad my mother was, but I didn't want to live with my grandmother. But in the evening, my stepfather came to pick us up. He wasn't alone. "I'm sorry. The child has nothing to do with it. I didn't know it would be like this," the old woman said. My mother listened to her incredulously for a long time, and she kept apologizing. It turned out that my stepfather refused to marry her friend's daughter, so my grandmother rebelled when he brought my mother and me into the house. But he talked to her, and she realized everything. Mom didn't want to go back for a long time, until I asked her to. I persuaded my mother to give my grandmother a chance, and she agreed. Now we live with her again, and so far, everything is normal. She has changed a lot, but I don't know for how long. But I think everyone deserves a second chance. What do you think?